What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you how to speedrun and beat every single dungeon in Throne and Liberty. Overall we have a lot of dungeons, each one with its own unique mechanics and a lot of simple ways to complete it quickly. All of these dungeons and their dungeon bosses will require just 6 random players. But perhaps if you are looking for the other 16 field bosses and how to kill them very fast, then don't forget to check out my yesterday's video. So let's move over to the first dungeon, which is the Cursed Wasteland. The common theme of this place is the glowing cracks on the ground that stun you if you walk over them. You will find these both on your way to objectives and during the boss mechanics. This dungeon eventually will become one of the shortest dungeons, as you can skip most mobs in your path and destroy bosses before even certain mechanics trigger. Shakal is the final boss you encounter in the Cursed Wasteland, and his arena is separated by 3 glowing cracks. The tank should stand on one section of the map, where the other DPS players should stand in another section. The reason for this is that the DPS can avoid the cone attack that the boss does. Every third auto attack pushes the aggro target backwards. Shakal will glow purple before this, and if he is not targeted in melee range, then the boss uses a breath attack that covers 1/3 of the map instead. The boss will always use the red orb mechanic before the purple one. So let's take a look at both of them. The red orb mechanic starts with a red orb that appears on your character. After the red orb disappears, an AoV black hole spawns underneath the location. Once the red orb appears, you have to move away from the rest of your party and go towards the back, or wait for the other orb to disappear and then immediately run away. And then the other purple mechanic is a bit more complicated. So this time a purple orb appears on your character, and after you see the boss spinning 360 degrees, then the mechanic starts where your character's location was after the spin. The boss chucks the flame breath on the marked character. The flame breath will cover 2/3 of the map if the mechanic is properly done without cheesing. And under 30% health, the boss will do this twice in a row. So if you have the purple orb, you should stand near the halfway position of the southeast glowing crack. One of the DPS players should touch the intersectable horn statue. This disables the crack and allows players to cross the line without being stunned. If you are quick enough, then the person who is marked can interact with the horn and successfully complete the mechanic in time. The DPS should always start running clockwise once the boss finishes his 360-degree spin. The tank should interact with the horn on the northeast side of the map, so that the marked DPS can walk through. Both the DPS and tank should move towards the western glowing crack. This should be the safe spot, as all other DPS can interact with the third horn, to let the marked DPS walk back to the DPS section of the map. And if you have access to a teleport skill like the staff player, then you don't need someone to activate the horn. However, there's also a shortcut, where the marked character doesn't need to run, since the flame breath from the Shakal flows the marked target, so if the marked target stands still and dies, it is unnecessary to complete its mechanic, and the rest of the players can move on. Next we have Temple of the Slaughter, and here's his location on the map. The big part about this dungeon is mob skipping, so the best places where you can easily skip mobs is between the first and second boss. You can do the same thing in the Cursed Wasteland or Butcher's Canyon, and have the tank aggro all the mobs away from the boss, as players only have to kill the second boss to proceed to the final one. So then for the final boss we have the Rex Chimaerus, and at the beginning of the fight, 4 players should be assigned to one of the 4 statues, and then 1 more player to the chandelier in the middle. This boss has 2 attack phases, the Fireball and the Frenzy. The Fireball phase makes the boss shoot out a single poison marker on the target. 3 puddles of poison are immediately shot out at 3 random players. After a short amount of time, this player becomes paralyzed. These paralyzed players take 200% more damage from the Fireball and explode if killed. However, this can be cleansed by using the Purifying Touch, and then afterwards the boss proceeds to fire 3 fireballs at this player. The boss sprays poison from its tail to its left or right side during each fireball. And the best strategy to counter this is by telling the marked player to immediately move as far away as possible in the direction of the tank. The tank should be able to tank 2 to 3 shots with buffs and healing. If not, you can line up behind the tank, but do not stack. Wand players should always only heal the player who is taking a shot, Depending on how geared a player is, this buff can potentially allow you to tank all 3 shots. If the tank has a dagger offhand, they can even use the shadow step behind the boss and have the marked player always stand in line with the tank. And then on the other hand, we have the frenzy phase. A voice line will occur in another language, and blue pythons will appear in the air. One player must use the first lower python and then the second higher python to land on the chandelier right above the boss. After landing, this player must pull the lever. After pulling the lever, the latches in front of the 4 statues can now be disabled by grappling. Naturally, 4 players must grapple and disable the 4 latches. If you take too long, then the mechanic wipes all players, so don't waste too much time. Next up we have the special Halloween edition dungeon, the Haunted Labyrinth. This is available during the Haunted Harvest event that runs from October 25 to November 13. The dungeon takes you into a battle with a spooky ghost, pumpkins and a final boss, the Lord Ebengord. The Haunted Labyrinth can only be accessed by redeeming a candy corn. You will receive 1 candy corn upon logging into the game, and then another one can be purchased from the Haunted Peddler who roams the map. So let's take a look at the Lord Ebengord. There are 4 main mechanics to prepare for this fight. So first off we have the AoV attack. The Lord Ebengord has a telegraph attack that is easy to dodge, and a ring spawns on the surrounding ground. You will need to move out of the highlighted area. Then prepare to move back immediately again to get into the range of the boss. He does do quite a lot of damage if you get caught, so try to pay attention. Next we have the pumpkin lanterns. During this mechanic, the boss will spawn 3 bells in a triangle around him. These can be punched into the boss by attacking them. If you don't knock them into him on time, then the boss will receive a massive shield. Next we have the pumpkin wave. In this mechanic, the boss spawns a large moving wave of pumpkins. Some pumpkins will be highlighted, which means that they can be attacked and destroyed. If you fail to do so, then a player can become entombed inside the pumpkin while the boss does big damage to you. And finally, we have the insect transformation. The boss will periodically make large AoV attack that can be dodged by pressing 1 on your keyboard or the relative button on your controller. This will make the insect land and dodge the attack, but just watch out for the bats. Next we have the Cave of Destruction. There's no speedrun route for this dungeon, however, make sure to target anything but the explosive ants. I usually target the larvae first and foremost, to reduce the time spent in the dungeon. But as far as the final boss goes, the Licorius, it will all depend mainly on the tank and a healer. The healer should focus their heals on the tank, so then DPS should try not to take any unnecessary damage. You can consider bringing even an off healer if your party is not geared. If Licorius is aggroed onto a ranged party member, then she'll use a massive AoV attack that damages all party members. If this happens, whoever has an aggro should move into the melee range immediately. Overall, this boss has 4 mechanics. The first is the pillars. Throughout the fight, blue and red ants will spawn. These ants will stun you if their fury attack connects. When a blue or red dome appears, the first wave of 2 ants spawn, and shortly after, the second wave of 3 ants will spawn as well. Killing a specific color of an ant will drop a zone that gives players in it a 45-second buff that allows you to enter the dome of the specific color. So the strategy is when the second wave of the 3 ants spawn, kill the ant that is the same color as the dome. Just make sure that all players are near it when you kill it. Otherwise, the player who misses the buff has to cheese the mechanic. Also, when the boss tells you a certain dialogue, then enter the dome and stand in the middle. A pillar will rise, and you have to avoid Licorius AoV attack. Doing this mechanic will give you a large attack buff. And finally, after Licorius attack destroys the pillar, a gem ant will spawn on one of the 3 platforms. So you then have to fly to the gem ant and kill it for the boss to land. Then next up we have the pillar cheese mechanic, in case one of your players messed up the previous part. So once you hear the voice line, run to one of the 3 platforms or the pillars. On each one of these platforms you will see an egg. Stand on the lower level of the platform and wait for the egg to explode. After it explodes, move onto the pillar to avoid Licorius AoV attack. Then afterwards, kill the gem ant that spawns on one of the platforms to finish this mechanic. Then for the third mechanic we have the one-shot skill. When Licorius' side glows red, he will swing down on the aggro target and do a simple double swipe, which will deal a significant amount of damage and cannot be blocked. which is why the healer should spend most of their skills on the tank and not the other party members. And finally, we have the larva mechanic. Shortly after the first pillar mechanic, a different voice line will occur that is distinctly different from the pillar mechanic. All players will receive an orange larva over their heads. They explode in 10 seconds and do massive damage unless you transfer the larva to another player. So what you should do is designate 2 players on your team to transfer the larva with each other. These 2 players then pick up 2 additional larvas from the rest of the party. One person should always go to pick up the larva from the melee and then the other one from ranged. However, whose job is this depends on your party composition. After 2 players have picked up everyone's larvae, they should move away from everyone else so that the resulting explosion does not damage the rest of the party. Next we have the Death's Abyss. There really isn't a special route for speedrunning the Death's Abyss, other than hugging the left or the right wall and skipping the mobs. For the second objective, where you must pull 2 levers, a person with a dagger can use a camouflage cloak to skip past enemies and pull one of the levers. Then the rest of the team can clear the other side. Then as far as fighting the final boss goes, your positioning and teamwork will be critical. The tank should position themselves on one side of the boss and the DPS on the other side. The boss regularly will perform a large cone attack on the aggro target that damages everything behind him, so that's why you want to stay on 2 opposite sides. The Carnix has 2 mechanics. It starts by the first teleport targeting the furthest player and dealing a cone attack. Then afterwards, the second teleport targets the next furthest player and does a very similar cone attack. And then lastly, the final teleport targets the next closest player and does a fury attack that stuns nearby players. Since the boss teleports to the furthest player, so the tank and 1 ranged DPS should be your designated players. Every time that the boss teleports, get as close to him as possible to avoid the cone attack. This also makes it easier to spin the boss away from your party. When the boss teleports, he always teleports back to the furthest person, so the tank and designated ranged DPS should not chase the boss around. And then second of all, we have the death sentence mechanic. This will occur after the first AoE fury attack, and once you hear a voice say, chase them to the ends of the abyss, then above 30% health, 3 players will receive blue orbs above their head. Also, 3 spinning sights will come out from the boss and chase you. And then when the boss is below 30% health, then 5 players will receive blue orbs, and this time 5 sights will spawn. After around 10 seconds, 1 player will receive a bubble, and players must gather in the bubble to soak damage from the upcoming attack. And after the bubble mechanic is completed, 1 or 2 AoE fury attacks will occur immediately afterwards. So the best strategy is if the boss was pulled to a wall during the teleport phase, then this time run to the opposite side. After 5 seconds of running along the outer edge, start making your way back to the center. Take care not to use too much stamina, as because after around 10 seconds a player will receive a bubble on them. All players should have already made their way to the center of the arena and stack on the player with the bubble to spread the damage from the upcoming boss attack. And then finally get ready to block from 1 to 2 more fury attacks. Then for one of the last ones we have the Tyrant's Isle. Overall he has 3 mechanics that always repeat in the same order. So first off we have the meteor mechanic. This will occur right after the first fury attack in his mechanics rotation. You will hear a voice line say, "I'll fry you." He then will call down a meteor that falls on 3 different players, one by one. Once the meteor falls, it explodes outwards from the center of the location. Taking this hit will cause a burn damage to you over time. Your health decreases at a significant rate if you take all hits, so the strategy for this is when the meteor drops, the shape of the damage area resembles a plus sign, so simply move to the center of the plus sign to avoid all following explosions. The initial proc of the meteor does not do too much damage. However, if you want to be ultra safe, consider morphing and running right, as he says the voice line. This will ensure that you dodge all falling meteors. Next we have the Greyseer's mechanic. This occurs after the second fury attack in his rotation. A voice line will say, "Try to dodge this." 2 of the 4 Greyseers in the arena will start to bubble, so you and your party members must stand on top of these bubbling Greyseers. The Greyseer then afterwards will erupt, sending you flying into the air to dodge the AoE from the tablet. And finally we have the rat mechanic. This will happen shortly right after the Greyseer's mechanic. He will pull all members towards him and turn everyone into the rat. The black will then do an AoV few seconds after turning your party into the rats, so you must use your first skill slot and borrow the head of your character to avoid the AoE. After dodging the AoE, you must unborrow yourself and then touch the flower to transform back into the human. So the strategy is to set up flower positions before the fight begins. Most people stand in the front of their flowers or the locations, and once a flower is used, another spawns in the nearby area. However, you and your party members will have to improvise if the flower does not respawn in the expected place. So then you will have to run into the direction of the chosen flower after turning into the rat. If your flower is close, burrow before it, but don't touch it, otherwise you will die to the AoE. If your flower is far away, you can run up to 15 meters away from the boss before you're required to burrow. And finally, after the AoE occurs, all rats must unburrow, otherwise the boss will cast another AoE that stuns everyone in the arena. Just don't burrow too close to the boss, let him run up to you and eat you before you reach the flower. And next we have Volley of the Slaughter. The final boss is called Torka, which is very mechanic intensive fight. As a result, be prepared to assign positions and roles to help your party understand where they should be. The fight starts with Torka launching a cone-shaped flame slam into the direction of the tank. Avoiding this attack being on the opposite side of the tank is usually the best course of action. After the cone attack, the Torka calls out and hits with a standard block blade attack. The boss then dishes out a massive AoE damage to all players. The AoE is unavoidable, and due to the huge damage output, it is worth having the party being stacked close to each other, so then you can make it easier for your healers. After this, the boss has two phases. The first sheep phase begins by knocking players back and marking two of them. This mechanic is initially introduced in the Elder mini-boss fight, and acts the same as a result. To make the tethering easier, assign the designated players to stand right next to both the marked players. This is because the closest player always receives the tether. Shortly after some standard attacks and some meteors to dodge, the Torka pulls all players in and spawns 6 sheep. The goal of this mechanic is to pull every sheep to the tethered player as quickly as possible. Additionally, the tether deals incredible amounts of damage to the sheep, meaning that the tethered player can kill them all quickly. When the sheep meet their end, an interactive object spawns in their place. However, do not attempt to interact with the object right away. As a result, some of the meteors coming down right after the object will spawn. Losing the interactive object to the meteors will cause a party-wide buff. To counter this, you quickly need to step away from the object as a party and then move back and immediately interact with the object. You will have an incredibly tight window between gaining an immunity shield from the object and the Torka initiating a party-wide AoE. And then afterwards, the explosive sheep mechanic starts. Then the second time, the tether is created between players. Torka will summon a single explosive black sheep to kill with the beam. If the black sheep isn't killed in time, a massive team wipe meteor will drop down in its place. As a result, you need to deal with its explosive sheep as fast as possible. So then when again the Torka is around 30% health, he will summon 8 sheep instead of the original 6. The way you deal with this mechanic is the same. Bait the sheep towards the tether beam once more. Finally, Torka has a dangerous long line dash that is only blockable with a movement dodge, so try to keep this attack in mind as the rest of the mechanics unfold around it. Additionally, you can even bait the Torka to dash through the sheep, dealing damage to them. And then for the last and final one, we have the Butcher's Canyon. You can speedrun to the boss by making your tank aggro all the mobs away, except the ones that are necessary before the first gate. The tank can pull the mobs towards the bridge and push them off using the Strategic Crush or the Fierce Clash. The mobs standing in the pathway are the ones required to be killed for the fog to disappear. You can do the same strategy for all the mobs and bridges. So then let's take a look at the final boss, the Magna Duke. If a ranged DPS pulls aggro, they should immediately run into the melee range of the boss. If not, Magna Duke continues to shoot projectiles with a massive damage radius. And overall he has 3 mechanics. The first altar mechanic is made when a ring of fire is created, and all players are pulled to the center. One person is rooted near the boss. If this occurs when the boss is below 50% health, then a portion of the arena becomes engulfed in the flames. 2 of the 4 altars outside of the ring will become red. The best strategy for all players is to jump over the fire to get outside, and interact with the 2 red altars to disable them. This will remove the root from whoever had it. If you fail to jump over the fire, you are rooted in the place for a short time. Then next we have the sheep mechanic. This time a ring of fire is created, and all players are pulled to the center. One person is transformed into a sheep. The sheep explodes after a certain duration. 2 orc curse casters will spawn outside of the ring, near the red altars. So the strategy for this is having 2 to 3 DPS, run outside and then target down the orc curse caster, so that a blue magic circle will jump. Since you can't jump as a sheep, the other 3 to 4 party members must pass through the sheep by touching the circle. Once the sheep has been transferred to the person outside of the ring, they should go towards the blue magic circle to transform into a human. With enough damage, players can cheese this mechanic by sacrificing the person who has transformed into a sheep. And finally, we have the jump mechanic. In this one, the Magna Duke gathers energy, and a red wave covers the whole boss. You must jump preemptively. When you see the boss stamp on the ground, it is too late to jump and you will take big damage, so try to pay attention to this. And that's about it. So if you enjoyed this video, click like, subscribe and comment. If you're interested in more content, then check out my channel and I will see you in the next one. So take it easy, peace.